Welcome into the Inside Scoop. Today is Wednesday, July 23rd. I am your host, Josh Newberg, and we got some recruiting to talk about today. We also have another big commitment happening on this channel tomorrow, so you got to hit subscribe. It's the best way to get notified when we go live. How else will you know when we go live unless you are subscribed? And look, we're almost to 100K. I think we could get there by the time the season starts if you guys jump on board and hit subscribe. All right. Today on the show, we have a dedicated segment to the Clemson Tigers. Now, we haven't talked a lot of Clemson on this channel because we don't have a great insider to do so. But with the merger with Rivals, we now have the best in the business, Paul Strelo from Tigers Illustrated. He's going to join the show today. Also, Alabama and Florida recruiting intel. Big show. Let's get to it. Let's talk a little Clemson recruiting, and we have Paul Strelo, Tiger Illustrated. Paul, finally, welcome to the show. You've actually been requested quite a bit in the comment section, so welcome.
Good to be here, and great to be on the On3 team. It's great to work with you again after a decade, and a lot of the national names. It's fun to be a part of a very reputable team we have here.
Yeah. And now we get to talk Clemson recruiting with one of the best insiders in the country. Now, the Tigers are 10 days away from the start of fall camp, which means recruiting is winding down. So let's talk about what is left on the board. And one prospect I want to talk about is running back Amari Thomas. He's fresh off this decommitment from Florida State. We know South Carolina is trending here, but is Clemson a factor?
Well, Clemson will be a factor if he backs off his August 9th decision announcement. I think if he sticks with that date, all signs continue to point to South Carolina as the direction he goes. I think Clemson probably foremost among several schools that are trying to get him to wait, go into the fall, get up back on some campuses, take some visits, and kind of go from there. But that recruitment's been a little impressionable here and there. Obviously, he committed to Florida State, but set up some official visits early in the summer to go to Kansas State even, and some other schools. So the door hasn't always been closed there. And I think right now Clemson is seeing if they can get him to extend things into the summer. But as circumstances stand, I think South Carolina is the leader in the Clum House, and odds are that deal probably gets done by the end of the summer for them.
All right, well, that's one to watch. All right, so Clemson has the number 12 ranked class in America. Looking back on it, on some of these big battles, what do you think the biggest win was on the recruiting trail this summer for Dabo and his staff?
Man, that answer changes like by the date, because within the last 2 weeks, just Clemson getting Dre Quinn over Texas with some of the victories the Longhorns have had to beat the Longhorns or any of the Texas schools for a guy they wanted down the stretch is a pretty significant flex. I think anytime Clemson gets a receiver out of Florida, that has been a dynamic marriage. And so to get Naeem Burrows, I think really opened people's eyes in late spring that Clemson's going to be a significant factor for this cycle. But I think if there's a big win overall for them, it is offensive line in general. It has been very difficult for them to change the narrative over several years when you competed against either Georgia for some guys, or you're going for the offensive linemen that the Michigan, Notre Dame, and Penn States are going after. But for them this spring, with Matt Luke to collectively get a Chance Barkley and beat Florida and some others from him, to beat Alabama and Miami for Grant Wise, to get Adam Guthrie away from Ohio State. I think they have changed the narrative around offensive line recruiting to where you can then pull Carter Scruggs, who's had a great spring circuit in the camps, to close with Leo Delaney and getting him over Michigan and Tennessee. So I think collectively they've got their best offensive line haul in many years from top to bottom with the depth. They've gotten some 5-stars, the Jackson Carmans before, but to go 1 through 6 like they have, both with quantity and quality, I think has resonated within the fan base as well as changed their perception as they go into the 27 class and are trying to recruit some national names there.
Yeah. So what remains in 2026? Is there a chance that Clemson doesn't take any more high school athletes?
I think there's a chance when you look at the fact there aren't any names. You mentioned Amari Thomas. He's out there. DQ Forkpo, the linebacker from IMG, but out of Georgia. Clemson has been involved with him for a while, and On3 and Chad Simmons have reported that Michigan is really the one that caught his eye and backing off, committing to what we presume to be Florida earlier this month. But Forkba has maintained his communication with Clemson, and I think Clemson has a chance to be in there long term as he carries things into the fall. So Clemson still has some positions that did not address this class. They don't have a running back, as we've referenced. Linebacker they do not have, and could Forkba be that guy? But I think there are several positions, those two mainly. But they'd like a big corner, a 6'1" type guy to go with Shavar Young and Marcel Gibson in their class. But those don't really grow on trees. Right. So I think you see how the season plays out, and you get a sense for, at running back, for example, does Gideon Davidson, their highly rated freshman, come in, and does he become RB1 projected for next season? David Ezeamume and Jay Haynes coming off injury. What does that room look like toward closer to the end of the year? So I think there's several positions that you kind of feel out what you have early on in the season as well as mid-season. And then as the carousel moves and maybe names come open, I think that they could take one or two toward the end of the year, but there really isn't a fish on the hook right now that they are carrying into the fall that you can say, all right, we're going to be tracking that to the end. I think if there are two biggest needs remaining for this class or for this year, you look ahead to 27 or the 26th season and defensive end. I think Bryce Perry Wright could have been part of that solution, right? But they don't really have another veteran that you see profiling to start next to Will Helt next year. Does somebody open up on the market, or do they go to the transfer window for that after the season? As well as offensive line, you've got a number of freshmen coming in, but as you look ahead to the following season, you've got 3 to 4 guys you'd pencil in as starters. Do they need another offensive lineman to kind of bridge the gap there? So there are circumstances that will play out through the course of the year that will dictate what does the high school board look like, and then where do they go from there?
Yeah, and, a big season. We'll see what happens. They could circle back on a guy like a Bryce Perry Wright. There's a few others in the state of Georgia as well. Maybe we see Clemson finish with a top 10 class. We'll just have to wait and see, but they got the quarterback to do it, a veteran program. So Paul Strelo with Tigers Illustrated, thanks for stopping by the Inside Scoop. Looking forward to talking Clemson all season long.
Yes, sir, Josh. Appreciate it.
Let's talk a little Alabama recruiting. Most teams, they're getting ready for fall camp. Alabama is still making news on the recruiting trail. Last night, Alabama lands a quarterback again, Taden Kawas, 6'4", 235 pounds from Hawaii. We got Tim Watts here from Bama Online. Tim, take us behind the scenes of this one, and how does it fit into Alabama's commit class?
This was interesting because we knew going into this cycle, Bama would like to take 2 quarterbacks, but again, it had to check all the boxes. It had to make sense because now you're figuring in financially on top of the roster and top of the quarterback room, and they went and found, a guy I think is one of the sleepers in the class, and I think there's a connection there with Nalu, who's worked with them. That's Tua and Talia Tagliavola's father. He's worked with him. I talked to him. He signed off on it. He certainly knows a lot about quarterbacks. So that was the connection. He came down. He worked out in a camp for Alabama. Yes, they got excited, brought him in for an official visit. Absolutely didn't take official visits. Bama was the heavy trend for a while. He just went home, thought about it, or took a couple of weeks to figure it out. But this is a guy they like. And when you add him on top of Jet Tamala, who I'm a huge fan of, kid from Nebraska, they flipped from Iowa State. Both of them are big kids, over 6'3", close to 6'4", athletic, can throw the ball. With Taden, he's a guy that you like to see him in the system. Hits a lot of seams. Again, he's big. He's over 230 pounds. Not as athletic as Jet, but 2 guys you can put in the quarterback room for the future. And it's really good. It's an A+ when you consider they had Keelan Russell last year. And just a few months ago, we were wondering who's going to follow Keelan and Keelan Russell. And I feel like they got 2 guys.
Yeah, really interesting take there. But at 6'4", 235 pounds, how can you not take him? All right. Anthony Tank Jones, one of the top edge rushers in the country, one of the best players in the state of Alabama, cut his list to a final 3, Bama, A&M, and Oregon. Tim, how do you see this one shaking out, and when is Jones going to make that final decision?
The thing about it, I know some people that express they're kind of like anxious or he's kind of milked this process. But I mean, to be honest, he's doing exactly what he told us he was going to do. He wasn't going to be in a rush. He wanted to get through his visits. I think one of the big benefits to this is being one of the last top unrated players in the country. He's one of the top 2 or 3 left who haven't committed yet. As far as his recruitment on the Alabama end, I know they did everything they could. I mean, they've recruited him. He's familiar with the program. Christian Robinson's did a great job. The Alabama staff has prioritized him, but he's always been rather a quiet kid. We've talked to other people. Texas A&M has a little confidence. Oregon has a little confidence. They seem to always have some confidence. So kind of wait for that commitment date because we'll know he actually has a decision. But he's a guy that holds his own counsel. But he did talk to Hayes Fawcett, and he told Hayes in an interview that Alabama was the one that jumped out to the front. So we're going to wait and see when he announces that. Was that a smoke screen? That's where it stands. But I think Alabama likes where they sit right now going into a possible decision date.
Right. And currently Alabama sits with the number 6th ranked class in America, 20 commitments. So a lot of commitments, but still room for a couple more. Tim, who's your favorite commit in this 2026 class?
I have a couple I like just overall. I think Bama did a great job with Chris Booker, the offensive lineman, was in Georgia, had no other offers really other than Alabama. Next thing you know, he's got a dozen offers, Georgia, Florida, among them trying to flip him. But the one that stands out to me the most is Jordan Edmondson. And I think that's because he committed early, and you kind of forgot about him. He committed early, great evaluation, coming on the heels of Dijon Lee and Chuck McDonald. Mo Lindquist has done a great job in that secondary. So you're getting a guy that I think has potential to be the number 1 cornerback in this class and has 5-star potential. You got him from the state of Georgia. Georgia wanted him. Everybody wanted him. Early eval, he blew up, was MVP at a camp, but he's a guy that meets exactly what Alabama wants, long, tall, and quick defensive backs, and to get him on the heels of what they did last year, I think was an A-plus effort also.
All right, so when it comes to needs in the 2026 cycle, is there anything that Bama would like to do before National Signing Day?
Yeah, they definitely want to add Tank Jones. He's one. They'll be evaluating a lot of seniors and guys could, emerge.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people forget. They act like signing day was in July. Guys, we've seen guys throughout our career pop up in November as top elite 5-star talents. I think they'd like to find an offensive line, but I don't think they have to get that guy out of the high school ranks. They can go into the portal. So it's really going to come down to fiscal sense, availability, can he play early, and all those kind of things. But for the most part, they've hit on everything they've wanted up till now. Priority was defensive line. I think they did a really good job there. Then they went for high potential guys like Jira Edwards, Xavier Griffin. I mean, there's some 5-stars we don't even talk about, Xavier Kroll, Cedarian Morgan. So they've hit at a very high rate of guys they focused on.
All right, Tim Watts with Bama Online. Thank you for dropping by the Inside Scoop today.
Anytime, guys. Thank you.
Let's talk a little Florida Gator recruiting. There's a couple top targets on the board. We got Corey Bender here with Gators Online. Let's start with Braylon Womack, Florida's chance at landing no 5-stars on the commit list yet this cycle, but Womack's going to make a decision next month in August. We're about 2-3 weeks away. Does Florida factor into this decision?
As of right now, Josh, I know what I've been told from people close to the situation that Florida has made up ground in recent weeks, but I think as of right now, Ohio State still is setting the pace in that recruitment. I know there's been some more optimism surrounding Auburn as of late as well, but I think right now Florida's probably running third with A&M behind Florida. I think right now, like Vinny Sunseri, the co-defensive coordinator, safeties coach at Florida, that could be his best relationship for recruiting. They've been very close. Even when he was at Washington, at the time early this year, Womack said Washington could have made his top 5 just because of their relationship with him. So obviously the relationships are in place. He likes Florida quite a bit, but I still think overall Ohio State's setting the pace in that recruitment. And as of now, I don't like using the term a hat on the table, but I think right now it's clear that Florida has ground to make up in that recruitment.
All right. Well, he's a 5-star. Isaiah Williams, he's a borderline 5-star, was a one-time commitment of the Florida Gators. He's also committed to 4 other programs. Currently, he's on the Ole Miss commit list, but the star linebacker from Leesburg, Florida, we can't just count this until the ink is dry. So, Isaiah Williams, do you think the Gators circle back on this one?
Yeah, I know you would think after a kid decommits and all the commitments he's had, some staffs would have been like, okay, we're going to go recruit other guys. But Florida is very much still involved with him. They like him quite a bit. He's near the very top of that linebacker board. And after he took his official visit, we weren't sure because he decommitted from Florida before the OV to Florida. We didn't think at first if that OV was even going to take place, and then it still did. And Florida, from what I was told on the trip, was basically telling his people, like, what do we have to do to make this happen? So he's clearly a top priority for them. And I don't put a ton of stock into when kids say, hey, it was my favorite school growing up, but that was the case with Isaiah Williams. He loved Florida growing up, but I know after the OV, both sides had a good amount of optimism that, eventually he could be back in the class. And I think after he flipped to Ole Miss, there was such, from the Florida fan base and just the chatter with him being committed to so many schools, he kind of wanted to get in the background a little bit and kind of just take everything in. So I think if he does make another switch in his recruitment, it won't be for a few more months or closer to signing day. But I think right now Florida probably has the best shot at getting him back in the class. And, it's funny, Josh, I remember him in February at the Under Armour camp in Orlando. He showed up at like 10 a.m. in like windbreaker pants on, barely stretched, and ran like a 4.42 at linebacker in the 40. He almost had a 40-inch vertical. And that's where I think Florida, a lot of schools realize, hey, this isn't just another linebacker. He's an elite talent. So even though he's had kind of a bunch of switches in his recruitment, they know the talent's there. And that's why Florida is still pushing very hard to get him back in the class. I think they still have a really good shot at doing so.
All right. How about linebacker DQ Forkpa? He was supposed to come off the board. I think it was either last Friday or 2 Fridays before that. DQ Forkpa, though, going to probably take this thing into the season. Any concern there? Because I think if he made that decision 2 Fridays ago, it was definitely going to be Florida.
Yeah, I think too, like you said, Josh, I think Florida, obviously, there was a school trending going to the decision. Michigan was a school kind of picking up ground over the final few days. It kind of made him want to delay stuff. But I think as of right now, I'd probably still roll with Florida. I know they're still recruiting him hard. Optimism is still fairly high in Gainesville. Another guy that Florida's very high on. They think he has a high upside, more of a height and speed guy who's going to get better over time. But I think the one thing too, Josh, that helps is him being an IMG kid. I mean, obviously they have a national schedule. It's not the easiest to attend games on Saturday, especially if they're playing farther away on the road. But he should be back at a few games this fall, and it's obviously going to be a lot easier to visit Florida compared to Michigan and some other schools. So even with him postponing his decision, Florida's still pushing for him, still one of the top linebackers on their board. And I think as of today, stuff could change, as we enter the season, but as of today, I'm still favoring Florida for him.
All right, Gators got 18 total commitments, sitting at number 13 overall, pushing for a top 10 class. So far, who's your favorite recruit in this 2026 commit class?
Yeah, what's one I like, Josh, is Tyler Jakeem. He's an offensive tackle out of Georgia, a guy that Florida offered just in the spring. He was kind of a 3-star under-the-radar guy, and now with Rivals, he's a top 100 prospect regardless of position. So he's a high upside left tackle or right. You can play either side, very flexible, very athletic, good footwork. I think he's one of those guys with a very high ceiling. Who can be probably a multi-year starter in Gainesville if he can continues to put in the work. So he's a guy I think it was a great find for the staff and a guy with a very high ceiling. And just to mention one more too, I really like Kevin Ford, the edge out of Duncanville, Texas. I think there's a lot of prospects that kind of have recruiting as it is that just need to get better, who are more upside guys. But with Kevin Ford, when you put on the film, he's just your classic pass rusher who just wreaks havoc on the edge, who really gets after the quarterback, changes his direction very well, and is just kind of relentless when turning that corner. And I think that's something Florida needs. They have a lot of big body defensive ends, a lot of guys that play on the edge, but, are more kind of that well-rounded, stop the run. And obviously they can get after the passer, where Ford is just that explosive guy who can really kind of put offensive tackles on their heels. So I think that was another good one.
All right. We talked about Isaiah Williams as a potential flip target. Let's say the Gators have a big season. Any other recruits that you think UF could maybe circle back on and try to flip this fall?
Yeah, I think a few come to mind, Josh. I think Devin Jackson, the Oregon safety commit out of Central Florida. He was committed to Florida for a long time, decommitted, then took a bunch of OVs, LSU, Miami, LSU, Oregon. Obviously committed to the Ducks, but I think maybe over time, maybe distance from home plays a factor in that. And I know Florida, they think he's one of the best safeties in the country. They're very high on him, and I think he's visited probably a dozen times. So the familiarities there, it's just about getting him back on campus and keeping those relationships fresh. So I think he's one that comes to mind. Trenton Henderson, who's committed to LSU, the edge out of Pensacola. Florida barely missed out on him. It was a very tight battle. NIL and revenue sharing, that was a big factor down the stretch. But Those numbers weren't too far off between Florida and LSU. And I think, like you said, Florida has a really good season. I think they can probably maybe turn the tables there, especially if they get on campus a few times. And I think another one, too, I think the last one is Davion Gross, the wide receiver out of Texas. Mm-hmm. Right now, Baylor and Oklahoma probably have the edge over Florida right now. But he's only went to Florida one time, and that was for his OV. And just that one visit made Florida a really big contender for him. I know distance from home has been mentioned as far as maybe a deciding factor, but from what we've heard, as far as the money side, revenue sharing, NIL, Florida is near the very top with that. And then they're also really trying to sell him on the Percy Harvin role. Billy Gonzalez coached Percy Harvin back in the day and said they've even told the kid too, if you come to Florida, you can play any position you want. And that's very high remarks for a kid. He could be a running back or receiver, but they've really rolled out the red carpet for him. So if Florida has a really good year and maybe Oklahoma or Baylor, depending which school he picks possibly this summer, maybe kind of stumble a little bit, I could see Florida pick up momentum later in the year if they get him back on campus.
All right, Gator fans, talk to us. Who's your most important flip target heading into the fall? Let us know. Comment section below.